recording. So officially, welcome to show and tell number 6 of Alpha. We're hurtling through as ever. If you go to the next screen, Thomas, our driver for today, we will do our utmost to stick to the plan. We've got 45 minutes with you, a bit less now. Cover the first chunk with what we've been up to, what we're trying to do, what we've learned, and what we've done since, and what we're going to be doing next. As I say, questions are welcome at any point. I've grouped them here at the end, but so by all means, save them or ask us at any point that you think is relevant, because sometimes, like me, you would forget your question by the time. Also, stick your hand up in the chat if there are any questions, and I can pick up on them as we're going through. Team slides, as ever, to keep things light. We have changed the team member to a good-looking celebrity. I'll give you a few seconds to do that, but just to say that our team hasn't changed, and we are leaning heavily on our core collaborators as ever, who've been really, really useful, and more on that later as regards to some user research that's happening in that space. But yes, still good, happy team. Answer to the question that I set at the start was that Geraint has changed into Stanley Tucci, or Tucci. I can't pronounce his name. There we go, thank you.
I'm finding it hard to see the difference between me and Stanley, to be honest, Pete.
No, that's what I mean. I thought you wouldn't get it yourself.
No, right? I wouldn't have spotted that.
No, he's a good-looking man. We know you're good-looking, so it was an easy one. But anyway, next slide, please. So yeah, I'm going to hand over in a second to the others who can talk more eloquently, but just as an overview, what I'm going to talk about today is, well, first and foremost, we've altered our scope, which may sound scary, but we'll explain why and why that's not the case. We're going to share where we are now and where we're heading, and we're also going to explain how we now know what to ask users. You may be thinking, why didn't we know anyway? But more will be revealed as we're going through. But yeah, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Thomas.
Yes, hello, thank you. So I'm going to be talking about the first couple of bits around scope and what we've done to review and alter our scope. So first thing to say, we have altered our scope. Little Darth Vader thing in there. For those of you who've seen Star Wars, which I'm guessing at least one of you is going to get that. Obviously, for altering something, we've got to talk about where we started on. So previously on waste exemptions, our scope looked a little something like this. We were planning to look at all the waste exemptions, particularly focusing on farmers' experiences of them. So then mainly focusing on the agricultural waste exemptions. Want to understand farmer behaviour around the exemptions and what bits might be confusing, and to understand why they register all of the exemptions, or at least all of the agricultural exemptions, and how we might make changes in the register or renew journeys to change the way that they select their exemptions. Our assumption that we had written down was, this is our kind of core assumption for what was happening. So when farmers renew their waste exemption, they select all of the exemption activities available to them. And this is a problem because it decreases the likelihood the conditions are read and complied with, because they're just going, yeah, all of them, it's all free, give me them all, off I go. So that was our kind of assumption we're working on, not necessarily saying that it was definitely true, but it's the thing we wanted to test and find out. So why did we review our scope? Well, reviewing scope, first of all, it's important to stress that that's a normal thing to do, particularly in an agile project like this. You should always be checking your scope against what you've learned to see if your assumptions need to change based on whether they've been validated or disvalidated, I guess is that the word. So that's one thing to say is we would always do that no matter what. We'd always be reviewing your scope, and that's both an ongoing kind of natural principle, but also an activity that we deliberately do, is go, should we still be looking at this thing? Should we be looking at something else? Always questioning that. The second reason why we reviewed our scope at this time was our initial plan on how we were going to challenge our assumptions was based on doing lots of research with farmers, which has proved a lot more challenging to do than we had anticipated. So we've not been able to do as many external user research sessions as we had hoped at this point. So given that our actual circumstances were different to our expected circumstances, it was prudent to see if we needed to change our approach. So we reviewed a scope and we have actually changed it. So why have we changed it? Well, firstly, based on the difficulty getting user research participants, we need to change our approach to challenging our assumptions, which means potentially changing what we're actually looking at. So we've actually narrowed down the scope slightly so that we can kind of go deeper but narrower rather than wide and shallow. Particularly as well, the scale and actually the complexity that was in exemptions was bigger than we'd assumed at first. So that's kind of also why we've had to do kind of more discovery type activities than we had initially expected. And what I mean by that is things like just doing normal user research interviews without kind of stimulus, without prototypes, and more kind of learning around the context rather than specific user behavior. And that's because after we'd conducted some, we still felt like there was more for us to learn. So we continued doing those types of interviews, particularly internally, to build context, because that was the most effective way for us to learn about what was happening at that point. So we had to do more of that than expected, and consequently less alpha type stuff to more prototype stuff. We also altered our plans from using so we had planned to use existing content as stimulus, or stim as the slang that we used for it. That hasn't been carried out yet because we changed our plan from building new prototypes to using stim first, but we haven't actually been able to speak to any users since we made that decision about 2 weeks ago. Suddenly seeing that Pete and all of us are in a lecture theatre together, is that the wonders of technology, huh? Yes, so that's one thing. I think Graham's going to talk a bit more about that later on. What we have learned about the service showed us that content is quite a big barrier in the service for users understanding, and there are clear issues with that. So we were able to kind of focus in on the content and understand what's going on there without speaking to users as heavily. So that's something that we kind of, it's still going to be high value for us, and we're going to be more able to access that. And I also want to talk about specifically that initial assumption that you saw earlier, this one here. So we've analysed that, checked it against our learnings, and then we've made some changes to that. So I'll quickly go through what that was. You might recognise this slide. Some of the people who, the long-term fans may have recognised this slide from an earlier show and tell. So this is one where we've gone, okay, let's look at all the different parts of our assumption here. Farmer, what is a farmer? What do we mean by that? Do we mean someone who works in a farm, someone who owns a farm, someone who holds agricultural exemptions? What do you mean by understand? What do you mean by the individual? What do you mean by all those things? These are the kind of things that we like to test about what we've said. So going through the assumption that we had here, so it was when farmers renew their waste exemption, it's like all exemption activities. This is a problem because it decreases the likelihood that conditions are read and complied with. So when we said farmers renew, we note that farmers have to renew every 3 years, which is quite a long time between renewals. So they're not constantly checking it, they're not constantly thinking about it. It's something that comes around not that often, every 3 years. And we also assumed in there that there aren't actually many new registrations. There are a lot of renewals, and that actually the churn in new farmers coming in with new exemptions is a lot lower than existing people renewing. We've also, the key assumption here really is this all bit, that they select all their exemption activities. And this is not quite as we had assumed. We had assumed, and the kind of internal assumption was that farmers selected all their, just all the available exemptions to them when registering, and actually we find that wasn't as prevalent as we thought. We've also learned that farmers are not actually able to change their exemptions once they've registered them. So when they are renewing, if they have previously selected all their exemptions, they've gone, actually, I don't need all of these, they can't actually change that. They can either renew all of them or renew none of them. And if they do want to, get rid of one or two or add one or two, they would have to re-register. So they'd have to deregister the existing ones or let them expire and then register new, which is not a good journey for them, and it's not a good journey for us either. What we have found though is that farmers often have help registering their exemptions. They often have help from union reps or from the customer hub or elsewhere. So we wanted to investigate if they do have help in the application process. Does that mean that they're missing out on helpful bits of content in the journey, or maybe potentially not so helpful bits of content in the journey that might help them understand the conditions better, so that they're actually able to comply with them because they know what they are? So we wanted to investigate that part of the hypothesis a bit further. There's a strange extra title in there for some reason. Yes, so yes, that's the thing I was talking about around not being able to select their exemptions or edit them once they've registered them. And yes, and this problem statement at the end here, this is the thing that we still want to investigate and figure out, but just the way we are approaching finding out what's happening there is changing, is the big difference. So what did it change to in a statement? So our new statement of scope is this. We want to find out what users understand about their exemptions, and we're focusing only on the top 3 agricultural exemptions. So these are the 3 most commonly taken out exemptions, D1, D7 and U1. So D1, I believe, is dredging in inland waters, D7 is burning waste in the open, and U1 is using waste in construction. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. But I think that's correct. Yes, we want to find out that, and then if they don't understand their exemption conditions, why not? And then where we could intervene in the renewal journey to improve understanding. And then our hypothesis is, by extension, compliance with their conditions. So that's the statement. The key thing to note is we've narrowed it down to just the most common exemptions. That's because there's a lot of content out there and there's a lot of things to learn about the rules and regulations, and we simply don't have the time to learn about all of them. But we can maximize the value we get by just focusing on the most common ones. We've also shifted the focus away from the kind of register, renew journey, just to the content part of it and the understanding part of it before the actual act of renewing and applying and stuff. So this is our new assumption statement. The unclear content leads to farmers struggling to understand the exemption activities, and this is a problem because it decreases the likelihood that the conditions are complied with. So that is my bit over there. So that is our assumption that we are testing. It's not to say that we believe that it is true or not. It's just, this is a thing that we want to find out whether it is true. So that's the kind of focus there. And then I think that's my bit. We will have time for questions at the end, but if you do want to as well, just put in stuff in the chat, and then we can answer them when we get to the end. I believe it's on to Graham now to talk about the user research.
Thanks very much. I think the first thing I'm going to do is hand over to Pete to take us through the initial bit of the user research related to why we were changing scope.
Yeah, this seating plan is really disconcerting, isn't it? I feel like I need to sit up straight and I look like I'm really shorter, but anyway, I'll move on. So why am I talking user research when I'm the delivery manager? So I help out the team wherever. I've been trying to help Graham as regards to sourcing farmers. So it feels like I'm in a good position to sort of explain about why this particular process has been hard, but there are some positives from it. So next slide, please. Thomas. Yeah, so in the interest of being open and honest about how this project is running, we obviously need to say what works and what doesn't work. So it has been hard to source farmers, and any of those of you that have joined us, we've given you updates and call outs for trying to get to speak to people. So it's not without effort, but so a breakdown of why that is the case. Well, first off, we certainly changed our user groups between Discovery and Alpha. So for those of you that did join those sessions back in the start of the year, in Discovery, we were looking at hazardous waste. And so the producers, carriers, receivers in that space, and supposed to lots of people in that sector. So while it's not unheard of to switch user groups between phases, we couldn't carry over our efforts and our recruitment into this alpha stage. So we went from a standing start. There's also no real history of doing this with farmers at NRW, and also sort of user research, as we're aware, of this sort of scale. So you're starting from scratch there. Obviously, NRW has a strong engagement with the farming community, but from the context of our work and how we need to speak to farmers, it's obviously quite different as well. So it takes some explaining. And we've also since learned that there's another agile-centric, farmer-centric project at NRW, the Woodland Creation Team, and having chatted with them, they've had similar difficulties in sourcing farmers. We have managed to find a recruiter to fall back on to help us with this, and they are doing that. And this is working, not very rapidly, but it is working. But we had to make sure that the recruiter we were bringing in was right for us, was right for NRW, was right for what they could deliver. That takes time to get right, but once they're established, we're very happy with the work they're doing, then we build from there. And ultimately, farmers might not like to talk to the regulator. As nice as we all present ourselves when we've sent our messages out to those contacts, and we state how that the conversations we'll be having with them will be in a very safe place, anonymized, and no fear of saying what they want what we want to hear, or for them to feel comfortable. Farmers might still be cautious to talk to what they can perceive as the regulator about compliance issues, which is not what we want to cover. But there's good news in all of this. As you've just heard, we've managed to change our scope. That's no biggie. It's something that's quite common, and we're able to adapt around this, so no problems there. We're also, from this, we're developing a solid set of recommendations to make things better in the future. So I would hope that we're not the only project like this going through this similar piece of work, and whether it's farmers or scrap car dealers, they're all going to be users, they're all going to be an interest to speak to them, and we've got tons of learnings about how to make that happen, who can help make that happen, and this will all form part of our alpha. And also we have spoken to some farmers already, and they liked us. I was on one of the calls and they said they did think it went really well, so that's nice. But they've also started recommending others for us to speak to, which we need to sort of lock down, so the snowball effect is in place. And also we've got some interviews lined up coming soon, so that's the end of my bit really. I'm going to hand over to Graham, who can sprinkle a bit more around user research.
Okay, I'll sprinkle away. Just to talk first of all about the people we will be speaking to. We've got our first Welsh language farmer interview on Thursday. Our colleague from NRW, James, will be doing that. That's a 250-acre beef farm in Pembrokeshire. There's a sheep farmer in Carmarthenshire we'll be speaking to this week, but we've got to fit in around the shearers, so I can't tell you exactly when that is yet. And next week we know there's another Pembrokeshire farmer actually with 700 acres mixed farming, and others are starting to come through, and we're doing the kind of due diligence and working out who would be good to talk to and who would make, when we add them all together, the best sample. Speaking of which, the slide is one of our murals, and I know we've shown you lots. I thought I wouldn't delve into it and make everybody slightly seasick because it's so big, this one. I'll just use some screen grabs. This was when we realized we were changing the scope, as an opportunity to make sure that we asked the right people the right questions. and make sure we were kind of completely focused on what we did want to do, and make the most use of the time we had sort of left on the project as well. This series of sort of workshops and this thinking was to feed into 3 user research sort of types of approach. One is a discussion guide, which is the script that sort of you stick to through most of your interviews. You adapt, obviously, for the kind of things you're hearing. But this discussion guide essentially means you've made a kind of proper assessment across the whole of the sample of the same kinds of issues in similar ways, so they're comparable. I think we've already mentioned what we call stimulus. In this case, we wanted to work out what web pages we should take people to see if they understood what was going on, and what kind of content we could put in front of people to get their reactions sort of in the minute, and not rely so much on memory, because people don't remember when they did this last 3 years ago or earlier. So, you know, that showing people things is very important. And then there's a survey that we're going to send out as well, and there's some questions. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. We sort of mapped out what we understood about the journeys users can go on, and what we needed to know about them. If we could go on to the next slide, it was a quick one. And you can see here as we go in, what we wanted to investigate here was, you know, everybody across the team, all the collaborators, what would you like to know? What will this help us deliver in this alpha phase? And what could we show a farmer to help us get to that knowledge that we want? And so we mapped these out over all the different experiences based on internal user interviews, the external user interviews we've done, the data that we've been collecting, and all the other information gathering we've been doing as a kind of hybrid team across NRW and CDPS. If we could go to the next slide, please. And then sort of what we had to do was work out, because there's so much everybody wants to know, we had to kind of work out how to prioritize and park certain things. So we can go on to the next slide, please. You can see here that there are some kind of people have very much agreed on one of the bits of focus, where all the red, they're supposed to be magnifying glasses, or you know, a search symbol, and it's, you know, very much to do with the question of, are people misusing exemptions or misinterpreting them, and can we draw a line in there? And it's the big kind of pivot in terms of perception on the whole project, related to the change of scope objectives that Thomas talked about. That's not the only one, though. There are plenty of others across this set. And then when you see the snowflakes or ice, they're things we can park, that we don't have to pursue. That's one of the key things about making the most of the time. You know you've logged something and it's important, but you don't pursue it in a particular agile phase. If we can go on to the next slide, please. We did the same for the discussion guide. If we can go on to the next slide, please. And you can just see some of the things that people thought we should forget about now. You know, funding influencing behaviours, Brexit impact, things like that, because these are things people had said, whereas we were sort of trying to concentrate on, you know, Welsh-speaking farmers and how they experience the whole process, and where guidance and sort of advice comes from. They were considered much more important things. If we can go perhaps onto the next slide. We also, when something doesn't seem to fit into a you know, an interview space, or you need really lots of people to answer the question for the answer to be useful to the project, we've put these into a survey, and themes are beginning to emerge around there. The one other thing, if we could go on to the next slide, please, is the hypotheses, as Thomas mentioned before, the things that we think are happening, but that we have to prove or disprove. Everybody in the workshops would, you know, all of a sudden think of something we think we believe in, and we're invited to sort of park it here. And we've taken that forward, and we've got a kind of bank of hypotheses that we know we can investigate perhaps with users, but also in the analysis of what we take from the user sessions. I think that's it. I think I'm not sure if he's in the meeting, but we were going to ask John, who's been working with us, if he had.
I'm not sure if he's here. I'm just having a look. He said he might not be able to make it along.
But thoughtfully, he's left us a big quote. What we've been asking NRW colleagues is to sort of change perhaps the way they sort of start to understand things that they've known about for many, many years. And so I'll read this out because it bears it. John was saying the project thus far spent a lot of time analysing problems that we traditionally don't do at NRW. We have a tendency to dip into solution mode very quickly. What I've seen is significant effort to strip the problems right back to bare bones, helping them to understand exactly what solution is needed. A definite change that's one of the definite changes of emphasis for him. And you can also see the benefit of this when the project team looked at prioritisation of effort in the next phase of work. Even though most of the project team have no waste regulatory background, their prioritisation aligned very strongly with my thoughts. It's that how the group brain perhaps can pick up all the key essentials of I'm putting words into his mouth now, but one of the things we discussed is how the group brain that shows in workshops can pick up on all the key issues very quickly. And he ends by actually saying, I guess when you strip a problem down to the bones, the technical element becomes, at least for the time being, less important. I think that's all from user research and analysis for this presentation. And I think I'm going to hand over to Adam.
Thanks, Graham. So even though the focus has changed and the first instance of how we want to interact with farmers is using existing content, there's stuff that us designers are kind of doing in the background to get a deeper understanding of what exists ourselves, to highlight our assumptions where we think things can be improved. I guess the best way to imagine what a designer is doing is we're like a scuba diver, not a scuba diver, so we're like a snorkeler on the surface looking down at the experts who are the scuba divers deeper down into this context. And we are the ones that have to sit on the surface, constantly looking back up, people on the boat who are the users, communicating with them, looking back down into the depths to understand what's going on down there. So we have to sit in this weird space where we're in between. And this time between when we get to maybe show them something new that we think is worth showing to them, we can kind of allow ourselves to sink into that depth a little bit more and really get into the weeds. So that's the sort of stuff that we've been doing and we'll continue to do. So if you can move to the next slide. So yeah, our focus has pivoted from grouping and selecting. So we're looking at things like, waste types that sit amongst all the exemptions, or types of activities that you might do, such as burning or storing or shredding. And we're kind of playing around with these ideas of how we would group the different exemption activities with the idea that by doing that would actually increase the user's ability to select the one that's right for them. So that's now changed. If you go to the next slide. Sorry, I go over the top of my visual slides here. But yeah, that pivot has gone towards the challenges within those specific activities. And the more we dig into them, the more you start to see the interesting tasks that the user is kind of expected to do, a level of understanding they're expected to have, and a bit of maybe forecasting as well about their future activities as they are registering an activity that they plan to do over the next 3 years. You can move to the next slide. So we've continued to analyze the content. One of the things we were doing, we were looking across all the different exemption activities, and as mentioned, looking at these different tasks, waste types that are mentioned, standards that are mentioned, external links that are pointed to, and all that work that we did initially with the idea of how can we group them is too valuable going forward to say, okay, how does someone actually make the decision if they should register a D1 or a D7? Move to the next slide. So these are the kind of more task-based assumptions that we're making at the moment. So the idea is, through this journey, a user needs to understand or have confidence that they should select that exemption, they should register it. They should have a level of confidence at the point of registration or renewal that is an activity that they will be doing over the next 3 years and that they're allowed to do as well. So you have things such as, before registering, so before they even register it, they need to know, am I allowed to do this? Is my activity taking place to a site of special scientific interest, in which case it's not allowed, or close to a water course, so therefore I shouldn't register this and I shouldn't do this activity. If they find out that they are close to a water course, maybe their task changes from registering that exemption to, okay, then, well, what do I do? How do I change my activity? Do I do something else? And that's a different challenge for them. Things that they need to think about before actually carrying out the activity. So they've registered it with NRW, but now the regulations are saying, okay, check to make sure that the ground isn't waterlogged or your land isn't frozen. These are all things that they need to do literally before they're about to do the activity. Otherwise, they'll be breaking the regulations as well. And then the first sort of grouping there is while carrying it out. So there's going to be keeping track of weights of waste and where it's being stored and how it's being stored, and maybe even documentation that's needed later on. I think one of the exemptions, can't remember the name of it now, mentions the need for a record. So these are different tasks that a user needs to do, from selecting it to using it to actually carrying out an activity. And a lot of that is being considered at the point in which they're thinking, does this exemption apply to me and to what I'm thinking about doing? This is all coming from designers' brains here, so this is not research back, just to put that forward. So what this allows us to do is then to dig in. So we've been digging into actually into D7 first. Sorry, if you can move on to the next slide. And you can't see this because it's way too small, and I didn't want to take you into a mural because it takes way too long moving around those things. But essentially, what we've asked here is, okay, so looking at the things that are specific to D7. So with a mural, you can tag them. So I've tagged them with the different names of activities, and I can quickly just hide all the stuff I don't need and focus on the things that just apply to D7, which is burning in the open. One of those things, for instance, is that in D7, you have to burn in the open. You can't use an incinerator, where there's another exemption or permit for that sort of activity. So they're things that are like more into the weeds of that exemption. But what is interesting is if you analyze it in a different way and say, what is the quickest way that we can tell a user that they don't need to register it? And that's what's on the left-hand side there. You have questions like, do you need to register in England or Scotland? Because if the answer is yes, then you don't need to register in NRW. That's the end of your journey. You don't need to dig any further into this detail. Next thing could be, are you a householder? So, for a user point of view, I know with waste experts, probably when I say householder, they know what that means, they know who that applies to, but different types of users might need to figure out what that means. Does it apply to them? Because if the answer is yes, they are a householder, then no, they don't need to register a D7. And then there's linear networks as well. Again, if you are a linear network, figuring out what it is the first task, but once you know that you are a linear network, you can then find out that you don't need to register a D7. So that first question on the left-hand side there is, how do you say, actually, this isn't for me? Because why would you read the details of D7 if it's not valid to you? And then the next thing is maybe the quickest route to understanding if the activity you want to do, so the activity you have in your mind, requires you to register the D7. We can play around with things like, what activity are you doing? Are you burning? Okay, you are burning. What types of waste are you using? Yes, that comes under D7. And that's when you start to know as a user that this is something that's worth my time digging into, understanding, and really holding on to. And then later on, when it comes to doing that activity, ideally, wouldn't it be great if users then come back and refer to that in some sense or form, so they know that they're carrying out the activity under the regulations too. So yeah, this is just a work in progress. We kind of switched scope mid last sprint, so we're kind of realigning, but you can imagine a lot of this stuff translating into types of prototypes, because the way we're breaking it down here, we can say, okay, the first thing you ask the user is X, and if they say no, then we say bye-bye, and if they say yes, then we take them on to another question, and you can start to play around with how content could be brought to people, how questions could be phrased. So yeah, that's hopefully what we'll be showing you in the next sprint. It's me, I believe.
Great, thanks, Adam. Yeah, so that's pretty much us. I just wanted to wrap up the the whole scope altering thing, just to say where we see things going. What does this scope change actually mean for us and for you potentially? Short answer is not a huge amount. It's just a different way of the point of alpha is to get learnings, so that when you do go on to build something, you've already made the mistakes, you already found out the things that you should focus on and shouldn't focus on way before you start building properly, because it's so much cheaper and easier to change and pivot and learn and make mistakes without building. So that's the idea behind it. So this is, while unexpected is expected, if that makes sense. It's one of the things that you expect to happen from time to time. So we're still going to get lots of learning from what we're doing, and more learning than we would have if we hadn't changed our scope, because we were slightly blocked. We're still going to give recommendations on what to do after the alpha phase, and yeah, it's just important to stress that this is a broadly positive thing, and even though we have had some blockers, the point is to learn about those blockers. I just want to quickly, before I go on to what we're doing next, just address the question that was in the comments from Matthew. So his question was, is there an alpha yet? It sounds like discovery is shifted from has waste onto exemptions, and in has waste there wasn't an alpha. Is this correct? If so, will there be an alpha created following the discovery phase on exemptions? So this is nominally the alpha phase for exemptions. We started on discovery into hazardous waste returns. We pivoted away from hazardous waste returns after the discovery because we felt that there was more value to be had in exemptions rather than hazardous waste. We did do two short kind of mini alphas in hazardous waste, which Rob's mentioned in the comments. So one was a slightly amended spreadsheet. There was a prototype made around null returns, and there was a list of the issues was given of all the things that were wrong with the spreadsheet. So, but there's no more work being done by us on hazardous waste returns. We've moved on to exemptions. The thing to say is, one of the assumptions we had with exemptions was that we learned enough in the hazardous waste space about waste in general that it'd be quite easy to move across onto exemptions. That was probably slightly naive of us. It has taken us slightly longer to get up to speed than we anticipated. Plus, it's been much more difficult to get external users to help us get up to speed than anticipated. So there's been no prototype made yet. We'll see in a moment what our plans are around that in the next step section, which is coming up. But yeah, so there is not a prototype yet. I think that's probably what Matthew meant by is there an alpha, but we are in the alpha phase. One of the things we do want to start to get across is what happens next, because we're coming up to the end of the alpha phase. That's going to be sort of early July, mid-July. We'd love to talk to ICT team about what that might look like to help you get ready for anything that might come down the line. And as well, we have a dual mandate here. One is to actually do something about waste exemptions that's going to improve things for users and for NRW. And the other is we're a demonstrate project. We're an exemplar to show the way of doing things and how it can be different for other projects in NRW. So that's a key thing as well. Hopefully that all made sense. Well, yes, I'm going to say it did make sense. I trust it did. If it didn't, do let me know. I'm happy to answer some more questions about that. Moving on, next steps. So what we're doing in the coming sprint. Well, so our focus moves from trying to get external users to really trying to get external users. We really need to speak to them. We do have some lined up, as Graham said, so that has changed in the last couple of days. We were starting to panic slightly, but do please still get in touch if you know anyone who might want to talk to us. And Louise clocked your comments, so we'll be in touch with you. So thank you very much. We have done some work on this already, and you might have, if you're very eagle-eyed among you, and one of the screenshots of the Graham's mural, the wishlist workshop, we had a big list of hypotheses. We have done some work to map and prioritize and refine those hypotheses, but we want to make sure we do that some more. And yeah, plain language. What are the things we think we know? What are the things we are assuming, and what do we need to test? What are the gaps in knowledge? How do we map them? We also are then focusing mostly on D1 exemption. So we're going to be looking at doing a deeper dive into the content around that, mapping the issues. That will hopefully include looking at the Welsh language content. That is tricky because we don't have any Welsh speakers in our team, but we're hoping to work with some to do that at the same time. And we will be starting to build a prototype. Now, we haven't done this yet because what we wanted to do with the prototype was build it based on things that we've been told from external users, things that we hadn't been able to learn from our work, just looking at the content as it is. As that's proved tricky, and because we do want to keep moving and keep a bit of momentum, what we are going to do is build one anyway, based on what we know already. It will be mostly based on our assumptions and our kind of experience building things like this in the past, our user judgment, user expertise. And then as we do get more external user feedback and research, we will be iterating on that and changing it. But that is something we plan to do this sprint. What that will look like, I can't tell you because we haven't started that yet. But that is something that we're going to be doing this sprint. So there will be hopefully something tangible and interesting for you to get your hands on. It may just be in the form of different content, differently structured. It may be something fancier with some click-through stuff. I don't know yet, but come back to the show and tell in 2 weeks' time, and you'll find out. And that is us, I believe. This I believe is Nelly, who belongs to Becky Favager. Very, very cute dog. Yes, so that is us. It's time for questions, if anybody has any about the project, not about the dog. So all shout at once. You can, of course. Sorry, what was that?
Okay, we're leaning forward in our chairs, waiting for questions.
Question?
As if.
Yeah. Yeah, if you do have questions and you can't think of any just now, but think of them later, you can, of course, email us or email Pete, or you can tweet us. Well, you can tweet the NRW account or the CDPS account. We might get back to you. I don't know. They might. Whoever runs those Twitter accounts might grab us to answer, or email, probably easier. But yeah, we would like feedback as always on anything we've said here. Comments, questions, thoughts, musings, opinions. Maybe not rants, but anything in a gentle tone is much appreciated. So yeah, if there is no questions, then do feel free to go about your day. You're free.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good rest of the Tuesday. All the best.
Yeah, and you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Cheers up.